losing more jobs and suffering more economically because of an energy crisis that takes place with a group of countries in the Middle East that supply our gasoline, our oil. These countries together are known as OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And OPEC was made up of a lot of countries that, quite frankly, the United States didn't love. They didn't love us. We didn't love them. But we relied on each other. And we relied on them specifically for gas. But whenever the United States steps in for supporting Israel, which was the enemy of these OPEC countries, OPEC decides to retaliate against us by having an embargo on oil. And what that word embargo means, we've seen it come up several times in US history now, is that they refuse to trade with us. And guess what? Like 95% of our oil came from OPEC. So if they're not giving us oil, then we're screwed. We can't run the factories. We can't run our cars. We can't do anything. And what happened, we've seen this with Hurricane Harvey, even a little bit with Snowvid in February, is that people are just like lining up like crazy at the gas stations and filling up and trying to get their cars filled as soon as they can, just because gasoline becomes so scarce in the United States. And because of how scarce it becomes, the gas prices really shoot up, and that stays the same even when they lift this embargo. OPEC decides, you know what, we'll trade with them again, but we're going to keep the prices high. So at a time where the economy was already doing bad, even more jobs were lost because of this crisis with OPEC. And people had to suffer through very high gas prices. So that brings us to one more slide, and then you have a short answer about that. This is the last thing about Ford. And this isn't really about him as much as it is something that was happening during his presidency. People were moving from the north to the south. And the north was called the Rust Belt. The south was called the Sun Belt. Honestly, I don't even really know why you guys need to know this, but you do. It's on the STAR test. So just know that in the 1970s, people were moving from north to south. And that's because the north during wartime had lots of production in the factories. But after war, and there's not as much production needed, the factory jobs aren't as abundant. And so people say, hey, we're going to go south to the Sun Belt in these warmer climates like Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California, so that we can go somewhere that's more comfortable and maybe seek other types of jobs. So basically, it's the factories were becoming obsolete, meaning that they didn't have the jobs that they had once provided. So here's your short answer question about OPEC. Remember, embargo means they refuse to trade with us. So how did that impact our economy? 2 minutes at most. we should be wrapping it up shortly. What I'm seeing from those of you who have submitted so far is 100% good. So there are two main things that I would say, and then I'm going to move on. So if you are still typing your response, let's hurry up and submit that so you don't miss out. But the two main things I would say is obviously that it caused gas prices to skyrocket, but also like gas literally runs our cars, it runs our factories, it runs businesses, it runs everything. So it also, just hurt the economy in that way. People can't produce at the same rate without gas, without access to gas, and that could impact employment as well. But the main thing is the skyrocketing gas prices. So going on to our last president in the 1970s, this is my favorite one. Like, he's seen as like one of the worst presidents, but he's like one of my favorite people ever. And that's Jimmy Carter. And the reason why he's one of my favorite people is because he honestly, I think, is one of the few presidents that came in office that truly, genuinely cared about people and not as much about power. But that's my own personal opinion, so maybe I shouldn't share it. But even to this day, Jimmy Carter is still alive. He's like 95 years old, I believe, and he still builds houses for the poor. And he still like goes to the church and teaches Sunday school. Like he is just very, very much into helping people. And we see that in his presidency. So we're starting out with a lot of good stuff that Carter did, and just like Nixon, ending out with kind of the downfall of his presidency. But with his domestic policy, again, that means here at home, what he does here in the United States is really focus on fixing the environment. So he takes some of Nixon's initiatives and extends them. So he cares a lot about regulating pollution and just being conscious about how much we are harming our atmosphere. But he also cares about equality. That was one of the big things that Carter wanted to have. And so he is one of the first presidents to appoint women and minorities to government positions. So that's pretty significant. He's giving them a lot of power. And he also is noticing that banks were discriminating against low income and minority communities. So he created something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which required banks to make loans available in low income communities so that people that were not necessarily rich white folks could also get jobs and make their way up the social ladder. So he just cared a lot about everyone's voice being heard and everyone having the opportunity to have equal access to jobs, homes, everything. Um, his foreign policy was humanitarian, which means that he cared a lot about doing the right thing and making the United States look like we care about others. And under him, like he really did care about other countries and doing what's right. And so you don't need to know what apartheid is, but what you do need to know is just that he supported leaders like Nelson Mandela. That's the guy that you see in that picture. He supported leaders like him because they were standing up for humanity and what's right. And another thing he did was hand over the Panama Canal to Panama. You might remember that Teddy Roosevelt, this is going way back, but Teddy Roosevelt had basically stolen Panama through imperialism and made a canal to help our economy. And Carter was like, that's not right. We stole this land from them. So it might not help us that much, but we're going to give that land back just because it's the right thing to do. Like if you steal something from someone, the right thing to do is give it back, even though you might not no longer have that valuable. And then there are two big things that also define his foreign policy. One is good and one is bad. The good thing is the Camp David Accords. And what this comes down to is that there were two nations, Israel and Egypt, that had been fighting terrible wars for 30 years. And the United States always kind of supported Israel just because they are a democracy like us. But Carter, being the peace-minded person that he is, thought, let's not take sides here, but let's try to get these leaders together and actually come to a peace agreement. Like, getting involved in other countries' affairs isn't going to get us anywhere, but if we can bring these countries together, that's how we'll get peace. And so he met with the leader of Egypt and Israel at the president's camp at Camp David, and they negotiated for a really, really long time and ultimately signed the Camp David Accords, which is where these two leaders that you see shaking hands with Carter in the middle, they agree that they are going to end fighting after 30 years. That is a big accomplishment. That's a huge accomplishment on the part of Carter. So I hope you are listening, because here's your next short answer question. What is the significance of the Camp David Accords?